So, back in 1995, there was this really fascinating physiological study that I think perfectly sets the stage for what we are doing today.
Oh, the surgical team study, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So they monitored the heart rates of these surgical teams during like incredibly complex procedures
Right.
because they wanted to see what happens biologically when something suddenly goes wrong, like an artery ruptures or the patient's vitals just completely crash.
High stakes.
Exactly, the highest. And for the average, perfectly competent surgeon, the data showed exactly what you would expect.
Panic.
Well, yeah, basically. The moment the crisis hit, their heart rate spiked to over 150 beats per minute.
Wow.
Their cognitive field narrowed down to this intense tunnel vision, and their fine motor skills actually started to subtly degrade because of this massive flood of cortisol.
Which is just a standard biological stress response.
Right. But the data from the top 1% of surgeons, like the absolute elite masters of their field, showed something completely counterintuitive.
What did they do?
When the crisis hit, their heart rates didn't spike. In some cases, their heart rates actually dropped.
Wait, really? They dropped?
Yeah, they didn't try to think faster to solve the problem. They actually biologically slowed their own internal machine down to regain control.
That is just incredible.
It is. And today, we are breaking down the exact trainable biological and psychological mechanism those elite operators used. Because the crazy thing is, it is something anyone can build.
It really fundamentally reshapes how we view performance under stress.
Totally.
Because we have this, societal assumption that keeping your cool in a high-stakes environment, whether you are in a surgical theater or like a tense board meeting or even just a brutal argument in your living room, is just a personality trait.
Right, like you're either born with ice in your veins or you aren't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what we are going to explore today proves that emotional regulation is not a trait at all. It is a highly specific neurological framework.
I love that.
And when you understand the wiring of that framework, the chaos around you essentially stops dictating the chaos inside you.
And that right there is the core premise of our source material today.
Yes.
We are looking at a really brilliant audiobook titled Train Your Mind to Win in Every Situation.
It's a great one.
Published by the YouTube channel Audiobook Rise. And to set the parameters right away for you listening at home, we are completely bypassing the usual self-help rhetoric today.
Thank goodness.
Right. There are no vision boards here. We aren't talking about positive thinking or motivation because, well, motivation is chemically unreliable.
It really is. It fades the second things get hard.
Exactly. So we are talking about strict neurological training. In fact, we are going into audiobook mode today to break down this entire system for you, step by step.
I am ready. And the mission for this deep dive is basically to hand you the blueprint for that operating system.
Yes.
By the end of our conversation, you are going to understand the precise mechanical difference between a brain that panics and a brain that pauses.
Which is huge.
It's everything. You will understand how to build a mental framework that acts as an anchor so that when the environment inevitably spirals completely out of control, because it will feel, your behavior remains deliberate, strategic, and entirely in your own hands.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the author starts by addressing what they call the inner game.
Right, the internal foundation.
Yeah, and to do that, they dismantle this massive cultural myth. And the myth is this idea of the external locus of control.
Oh, this is such an important concept.
It is. It's the idea that we can somehow fix our outward results, like our relationships or our career trajectories, without fundamentally rewriting the internal code that actually generates those results.
Right.
The book argues that before you ever lose a situation externally, like before you snap at your partner or freeze up during a presentation, you have already lost the situation internally.
The internal loss always precedes the external failure.
Every time.
But I think what is so incredibly dangerous about that internal loss is how microscopically quiet it is.
Yeah, it's invisible.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen with some dramatic alarm bell ringing in your head. It happens in a fraction of a millisecond.
Right.
Neurologically, it is the moment when an external stimulus hits your brain. And instead of your prefrontal cortex, the logical executive part of your brain managing the response, the amygdala just completely hijacks the wheel.
It just takes over.
It takes over. It's that tiny moment of cognitive load where doubt interrupts your focus or hesitation replaces clarity. So the external failure everyone sees is really just a delayed physical symptom of that internal biological surrender.
The book uses a phrase that I think captures this surrender perfectly. It called it reaction mode.
Reaction mode, yeah.
It argues that a vast majority of people spend their entire lives just stuck in reaction mode.
Sadly true.
Right. Their internal state is continuously dictated by external variables. So they wake up, they check their phone, they read an inflammatory email, and bam, their nervous system is immediately compromised.
Within seconds of waking up.
Exactly. And then they hit traffic on the way to work, and their baseline stress elevates again.
And, the language we use socially actually reveals how deeply embedded this reaction mode really is.
Oh, for sure. Give an example.
Well, think about the casual phrases we throw around every single day without even thinking. We say things like, he made me angry, or this traffic is stressing me out.
She ruined my morning.
Exactly. Those statements sound entirely normal in our culture. No one questions them. But the author makes this really brilliant, if slightly uncomfortable, observation. Every single one of those statements is actually a subconscious admission of weakness.
Oof, that's heavy. But okay, let me push back a little bit. Let's test how that actually holds up in reality. So say I'm driving and someone aggressively cuts me off in traffic and almost causes a massive wreck. My adrenaline spikes.
Yep.
That is a biological reality. Are we seriously supposed to pretend that the other driver didn't cause that stress? I mean, isn't that just semantic wordplay to say he didn't make me angry?
That is such a fair question, but it's really not wordplay. It's about that locus of control we mentioned.
Okay, explain that.
Yes, the other driver created a dangerous external variable. And yes, your body released adrenaline that is an autonomous, unavoidable survival response.
Right, I can't control the adrenaline.
Exactly. But the author's point is entirely about what happens in the milliseconds after that chemical release.
Oh, I see.
When you say, he made me angry, you are essentially saying, I have outsourced my emotional regulation to a complete stranger in a Honda Civic.
Wow, when you put it like that.
Right. You are giving an external, random force the full credit for your ongoing internal state. Winning the inner game means entirely removing that language from your operating system.
So how do you reframe it?
The feeling of stress is just information. It is your internal dashboard blinking and saying, hey, adrenaline is present. But that feeling is not an instruction manual demanding that you honk your horn, scream out the window, and ruin the next 3 hours of your own day.
That's a huge distinction.
Feelings are data points, not directives.
It's the difference between observing the data and becoming the data.
Yeah.
But this leads to, a massive friction point for a lot of people, because the book talks about establishing these non-negotiable internal standards to override those feelings.
Right, setting the baseline.
Yeah, and it argues that we shouldn't rely on motivation at all. We should rely entirely on discipline. But, and this is a big but, if my prefrontal cortex is literally depleted of glucose at, say, 5:00 p.m. after a chaotic day.
Oh, decision fatigue.
Yes, my decision-making capacity is shot. So telling someone who is genuinely burned out and biologically exhausted to just, use discipline, it feels a bit like telling a pilot whose engines have failed to just fly harder.
Right. It's frustrating advice.
So how does this internal standard actually hold up when the biological battery is just empty?
And that right there is exactly why motivation fails and why the source defines discipline so differently than mainstream culture does.
Okay, how does the book define it?
Well, we usually view discipline as this constant, grueling exertion of willpower, like gritting your teeth.
Yeah, white-knuckling it.
Exactly. But willpower is finite. Like you said, by 5:00 p.m., decision fatigue has exhausted your prefrontal cortex. The author's solution here is this concept of removing choice.
Removing choice.
Yes. True discipline isn't about fighting a grueling internal battle every single time you need to do something difficult. Discipline is the deliberate elimination of the negotiation process entirely.
Oh, so you're shifting the burden away from the exhausted part of the brain.
Precisely. Neurologically, when a behavior becomes a strict, non-negotiable standard, it actually shifts from the prefrontal cortex, which requires immense energy, to the basal ganglia.
And the basal ganglia is what governs automatic habits, right?
Exactly. Think about brushing your teeth. You don't have an intense internal debate at 11:00 p.m. about whether you feel inspired to brush your teeth.
I mean, I hope not.
Right. You don't weigh the pros and cons, you just do it, because the choice has been removed long ago. The author argues that under pressure, you do not rise to your potential.
You fall to your level of automatic discipline.
Yes. If your discipline requires a daily internal debate, pressure will shatter it instantly. But if your discipline is a pre-programmed algorithm like, when X happens, I always do Y, then pressure doesn't require extra cognitive energy. It just triggers the algorithm.
Wow. Okay, so we've established this internal discipline mechanism.
Yeah.
But let's be real for a second. What happens when that baseline discipline just completely fails because of a sudden, super intense provocation?
Like an ambush.
Yeah. You are sitting in a meeting and a colleague actively, publicly insults your intelligence.
Ouch.
The internal standard you set this morning shatters. Your heart rate hits that 150 beats per minute we talked about. How does the body override the brain in that specific, highly charged microsecond?
That's the real test.
Because the book makes a really profound claim here. It says calm is a trained skill, not a personality trait.
It is entirely trainable. And the reason it's trainable is because calm is rooted in physiology, not just psychology.
Biology again.
Always the biology. When that insult lands in the meeting, your amygdala registers it as a literal physical threat to your survival.
Even though it's just words.
Your body doesn't know the difference between social embarrassment and a physical predator in the woods.
That is wild.
It immediately dumps cortisol and adrenaline into your bloodstream. Your breathing becomes shallow, your muscles tense up, and your higher reasoning centers, that prefrontal cortex, start to shut down.
And the universal mistake we all make in that moment is trying to talk our way out of a biological trap.
Yes.
We clench our fists, we hold our breath, and we scream at ourselves internally, just relax, don't let them get to you.
Which never works.
Never. Because you can't use a hijacked brain to fix a hijacked brain.
You absolutely cannot.
Yeah.
You are essentially trying to reason with a nervous system that is preparing for mortal combat. It won't listen.
So what's the hack?
The source argues for the exact reverse approach. You must use the physical body to signal to the brain that the environment is actually safe. It's a biological hack, and it centers largely around the vagus nerve.
Which is part of the parasympathetic nervous system, right?
Exactly, the rest and digest system.
Yeah.
So when you deliberately engage in slow, diaphragmatic breathing,
Belly breathing.
yes, and when you consciously drop your shoulders away from your ears, and when you forcefully unclench your jaw, you physically stimulate that vagus nerve.
And that stimulation isn't just symbolic, it's a mechanical release of chemicals.
Exactly right. It releases a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which acts as a literal physical brake on your heart's pacemaker.
Oh, wow.
It forcefully lowers your heart rate. By manipulating your physical posture and your breath, you are setting an undeniable chemical signal upstream to the brain saying, "We are not being hunted. Stand down."
Mind does not calm body under sudden pressure. Body calms mind.
Body calms mind. And once the body forces that chemical reset, the prefrontal cortex slowly comes back online, and you actually regain the ability to choose your response.
That is the dividing line right there between a reaction and a response.
Say more about that.
Well, reaction is the amygdala firing blindly. Response is the prefrontal cortex stepping back in to assess the board,
Perfect place.
But I want to heavily challenge the book's idea of emotional restraint here.
Okay.
Because if you look at the culture, especially corporate culture and digital culture right now, restraint is so often framed as complicity or weakness.
That's true.
We equate quick, fiery, immediate reactions with strength and authenticity. If someone comes at you, the culturally celebrated move is the immediate, devastating clapback.
Oh, the internet loves a clapback.
Right. If you pause, if you just stay silent and breathe, isn't that broadcasting weakness? It feels like you are letting them win the moment.
What's fascinating here is that the exact opposite is true. And the strategy of the immediate clapback is fundamentally flawed.
How so?
The author makes it very clear that speed under emotion is almost always a tactical error. The urge to respond immediately, to defend your ego, to explain yourself that speed feels like power in the moment.
It gives you a quick dopamine hit.
Exactly. But it is an illusion of power. It is a reaction driven entirely by fear and insecurity. When you react instantly, you are actually proving to the aggressor that they have the access code to your control panel.
Wow. It reminds me of a concept in audio engineering.
Oh.
So if you have a microphone picking up chaotic, really loud background noise, you don't fight it by broadcasting a louder noise over it. That just makes it worse.
Right.
You create a noise-canceling effect by broadcasting the exact inverted sound wave. You introduce a precise, calculated silence that actually neutralizes the chaos.
That is a phenomenal analogy. That is exactly what this is. Silence and physical restraint are not passive submission at all. They are delayed power.
Delayed power. I like that.
Think of it like a financial short squeeze.
Okay.
When someone acts aggressively or highly emotionally towards you, they are essentially over-leveraging their emotional capital. They are expecting a predictable reaction from you to bail them out, to match their energy, and validate their bad behavior.
They need you to engage to make it a fight.
Right. So when you introduce a deliberate pause, when you simply look at them, breathe, and say absolutely nothing for 3 full seconds, you cut off their oxygen. You force a margin call on their behavior.
You just leave them hanging in the dead air of their own emotional outbursts.
Precisely. They expected resistance, and instead they hit a brick wall of absolute composure. Suddenly, the reactive person feels profoundly insecure.
Because they're exposed.
Yes, they are forced to adjust to your baseline. A calm person who knows how to utilize the pause ultimately controls the temperature of the entire room. You aren't demanding authority through volume. You are commanding it through steadiness.
That is so powerful. So, okay, we've mapped out how to survive the acute stress, like that 5-second window of an insult or a sudden crisis.
The sprint.
Right. But let's transition to the chronic application of this. What happens when the stress isn't a single fleeting moment?
The marathon.
Exactly. What if the stress is a grueling 6-month merger at work? Or a deeply difficult season of life where your environment is just continuously chaotic?
Yeah, that's different.
You can't just take one deep breath and fix a 6-month crisis. That requires a shift from momentary restraint to, like, long-term mental endurance.
The source really forces us to redefine what endurance actually is.
How so?
Well, we have a tendency to romanticize endurance as this high-intensity, gritting-your-teeth cinematic struggle.
Rocky running up the steps.
Exactly. But true endurance isn't about peak intensity at all. It is simply about staying power. It is the ability to tolerate mild, prolonged discomfort without frantically seeking a distraction or an exit strategy.
The book makes a brilliant razor-sharp distinction here between discomfort and damage.
Yes.
And this is critical because our brains are evolutionarily wired to conflate the two.
Right.
The brain operates as this predictive threat detection machine. So when an untrained mind experiences the friction of a long project, maybe it's just the sheer boredom of data entry or the frustration of a plateau in your progress, the slog. The brain registers that discomfort and interprets it as damage. It signals, hey, this feels bad, therefore harm is occurring, therefore we must abandon ship immediately.
Yes, and that is a massive biological false alarm. A trained mind understands that discomfort is not damage. Discomfort is just the nervous system adapting to a new threshold of capability.
It's growing pains.
Exactly. It is the cognitive equivalent of muscle hypertrophy. If you're lifting weights and you drop the bar the absolute second your muscles start to burn, you will never trigger growth.
Because the growth only happens when you stay inside the burning sensation without escaping.
Exactly. Mental endurance is built in the exact same way. When the boredom hits, when the frustration peaks, you train your mind to simply sit in it. You observe the friction without letting it dictate an evacuation.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If you're listening to this right now on your commute, you might be thinking, okay, sitting with discomfort sounds great in a book. But I live in the real world where my phone is buzzing constantly, my inbox is flooded, and I'm expected to multitask every second of the day.
The modern reality.
Right. The modern world is essentially a hyper-optimized training camp for instant relief. We have engineered our entire environments to completely eliminate the need to ever be bored or uncomfortable.
We can always swipe away from the discomfort.
Exactly. So how do we actually fight that gravitational pull to seek a distraction? The millisecond things get overwhelming.
The book offers a highly tactical mechanism to counteract that overwhelm, and it's called sequential thinking.
Sequential thinking.
Right. So when you are trapped in a chaotic environment, say you are a project manager dealing with a supply chain failure, a furious client, and a budget shortfall, all at the exact same time.
A Nightmare Tuesday.
Right. Your brain tries to process all of those variables simultaneously, but your working memory can realistically only hold about 4 to 7 pieces of information at a time.
So it just instantly overflows.
Yes, and that overflow is exactly what we experience as panic and paralysis.
So the untrained mind responds to external chaos by speeding up internally. It tries to match the chaotic frequency of the environment.
Exactly. It frantically multitasks, which we know neurologically just severely degrades performance across all the tasks.
It makes everything worse.
The trained mind does the exact opposite. As external chaos increases, the internal machinery actually slows down. Sequential thinking is essentially an aggressive pruning of the cognitive tree.
Pruning the tree.
Right, instead of trying to hold 10 critical variables in your head at once, you force all of that noise through a single ruthless filter. You ask, what is the one thing that matters most right now?
Just one thing.
Not 3 things. Not the end goal of the project. What is the single very next requirement?
It's the ultimate reduction of cognitive load. By identifying the one immediate requirement, everything else isn't dismissed as irrelevant forever. It's just categorized as not right now.
Precisely.
You effectively shrink the universe down to the very next step.
You isolate the variables, and as you navigate this long-term endurance, using sequential thinking to take one step at a time, the author notes that your relationship with failure has to fundamentally evolve.
Oh, for sure. Because if you're going for 6 months, you're going to mess up.
You are going to make mistakes.
Yeah.
You must learn to treat failure purely as data rather than as a verdict on your identity.
Okay, but that is so much easier said than done. How do we mechanize that detachment? How do we stop taking failure personally?
It requires completely separating your ego from the outcome. An untrained mind personalizes the setback. They launch a product, it fails, and their internal narrative immediately says, I am failure, I am not cut out for this.
Right.
Because they attach the failure to their identity. Their ego demands that they quit to prevent any further psychological pain.
It's a defense mechanism.
Exactly. A trained mind looks at the exact same failed product launch and says, okay, the marketing channel underperformed by 40%. The pricing model was misaligned with the demographic.
Just cold, hard facts.
Yes. They view failure as a neutral data set pointing to mechanical adjustments. By keeping the ego out of the post-mortem, you preserve the emotional capital you need to actually stay in the game.
Which perfectly bridges us to the final and perhaps most vital layer of this entire operating system.
Narrator.
Yes. We've talked about establishing discipline, biologically hacking the physical pause, and utilizing sequential thinking for long-term endurance. But dictating every single one of these actions is the internal narrator.
The voice inside.
Right. It is the constant voice inside your head commenting on the journey. And the book emphasizes that your self-talk is not just a passive radio station playing in the background.
It is not passive at all. It is the active programming language of your nervous system. Neuroscientists look at the default mode network in the brain, the network that is active when we are awake, but not focused on the outside world. That is where your self-talk lives.
And that network is powerful.
It is. And your nervous system deeply, implicitly believes whatever narrative that network repeats. If your internal voice is catastrophic, hostile, or highly dramatic, your external behavior will inevitably mirror that instability.
I want to be very careful here, though, because the moment we mention self-talk, people roll their eyes, assuming we're talking about toxic positivity.
Oh, absolutely.
Like standing in front of a mirror saying, I am a tiger, I am invincible. But the source is explicitly against that kind of delusional affirmation, right?
Yes, completely. It's not about being artificially positive. It's about being ruthlessly precise.
Precise.
The author draws a really sharp line between dramatic self-talk and precise self-talk.
Give me an example.
So the untrained voice defaults to emotional absolutes. When faced with a massive hurdle, it says, this is a disaster, I always mess this up, I can't handle this.
Good drama.
Right. And when you broadcast that narrative, your nervous system responds appropriately. It shuts down effort, spikes anxiety, and looks for an escape.
But the trained voice strips the emotion out entirely. It is neutral and firm.
Exactly.
So instead of saying, this is a disaster, it evaluates the geometry of the problem and says, this is a highly complex situation. We need to break it down into 3 phases.
Yes.
Instead of, I can't handle this, the instruction is, execute the next requirement. It shifts from dramatic commentary to objective instruction.
And notice how that precision protects your identity, just like we discussed with handling failure. You evaluate the specific behavior or the specific problem, not your inherent self-worth.
You don't exhaust your cognitive bandwidth by insulting yourself.
Exactly. You just correct the coordinates and keep moving. And this leads to the ultimate physical manifestation of mental strength, which the book calls acting without emotional permission.
Acting without emotional permission. Let's really dig into the mechanics of that phrase, because human beings are notoriously bad at this.
We're terrible at it.
We constantly wait for our internal weather to perfectly align with our goals. We wait to feel confident before we speak up in a meeting. We wait to feel motivated before we start the project.
We want the mood to strike.
Right. But the book says that elite performers show up on schedule regardless of mood. So let me ask you, if a listener is paralyzed by the sheer size of an outcome they are trying to achieve, let's say writing a book or launching a company, how does shifting focus to simply attendance relieve that paralysis?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it all comes down to the physics of control. When you fixate on massive outcomes, the bestseller list, $1 million in revenue, the flawless presentation you are fixating on, variables you do not control.
True.
You do not control the market, the audience, or random systemic shocks. When you tie your success to things you don't control, anxiety is the mathematical result. It paralyzes you.
Because it's overwhelming.
Exactly. But attendance, the act of simply showing up to your desk for 1 hour, regardless of whether you feel like a genius or a total imposter, that is 100% within your locus of control.
So you completely redefine success at a microscopic level. Success isn't, did I write a masterpiece today? Success is, did I sit in the chair for 60 minutes today?
Exactly. You change the metric. When you shift from, did I win the outcome,
Yeah.
to, Did I execute the attendance?
Mm-hmm.
You strip away the immense, crushing pressure that prevents people from starting.
You act without needing your emotions to sign off on the activity.
Yes. And when you do this consistently, something really fascinating happens. Your emotions eventually realize they're no longer in charge. They actually stop fighting you so hard.
Because consistency compounds.
It compounds exponentially. People are so obsessed with loud progress.
The hustle culture.
Right, the 24-hour hustle,
Yeah.
the massive, exhausting sprints that look great on social media, but inevitably end in clinical burnout. But the author champions quiet progress.
Quiet progress.
Quiet progress is just attendance. It's showing up, doing the unglamorous, boring work day after mundane day without requiring an audience or applause. It's highly sustainable.
It's the foundation.
And paradoxically, 5 years of quiet progress is exactly what looks like an overnight success to everyone on the outside. They don't see the thousands of invisible mornings where you chose your internal standard over your comfort. They just see the unshakable foundation you built.
Wow. So what does this all mean? If we take a step back and look at this entire framework, from the locus of control to the vagus nerve hack to sequential thinking and precise self-talk, what is the central thesis here?
It's a shift in identity, really.
Yeah. It becomes incredibly clear that mental strength is not about becoming a sociopath.
Thankfully.
Right. It is not about mutating into this cold, emotionless robot who never feels stress, fear, or profound exhaustion. You will absolutely feel all of those things.
You're human.
Exactly. The goal is becoming a person whose behavior is no longer held hostage by those feelings. It is about engineering a reliable biological and psychological system that operates flawlessly, even when the external conditions are a complete disaster.
That is the perfect synthesis. You don't magically eliminate the pressure of life. You expand your structural capacity to hold that pressure.
You build a stronger container.
Yes. You don't wait for the external chaos to politely subside, because it won't. You cultivate a ruthless clarity within the center of the storm. It is a fundamental evolution from being a reactor, someone whose state is violently pushed around by every passing headline, traffic jam, and rude comment, to being the architect of your own response.
What's this architect?
It is a grounded, reliable power, and it is forged entirely through unglamorous, deliberate repetition.
It is just a phenomenal blueprint. We really want to give a massive acknowledgement to our source material today, the audiobook Train Your Mind to Win in Every Situation by Audiobook Rise.
Highly recommend checking out the full thing.
Absolutely. The concepts inside it are truly paradigm shifting. If you found value in this deep dive, if it gave you a new lens on your own reactions, please subscribe so you don't miss our next analysis.
We have some great ones coming up.
We do, and we genuinely love to hear from you listening. Drop a comment below and let us know what one non-negotiable internal standard you were going to encode into your operating system today. Just one.
And as you step back into your day, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to really mull over, drawn from the deepest currents of our source material.
Lay it on us.
True mental strength, that unbreakable composure we all admire, is built entirely in the dark.
In the dark.
Is built in private. There is no audience to validate your internal restraint. There will be no applause when you choose to take a slow, diaphragmatic breath instead of delivering a devastating insult. No one will ever know about the chaotic, destructive, ego-driven reaction you quietly chose not to have.
It's totally invisible.
The training is completely invisible.
Right.
But the reward for that invisible training is incredibly public. Because eventually, as you stack those quiet moments of restraint, the world around you begins to shift. It bends to respect the person who simply cannot be shaken.
So the next time you find yourself in that room, your heart racing toward 150 beats per minute, your chest tight, and the words right there on the tip of your tongue, ready to explode, remember the mechanism. The check engine light is flashing, but you are still the one holding the wheel. You hold the power to pause,